that supports ever how you're trying to sell. For me, strategic selling, you've got to be able to, customer success is important. So you got to have a good product that works.
Yeah.
None's going to be perfect, but you got to have a good product that works, and you got to have a good team that's customer focused, and you got to have bosses that say, okay, we're going to manage. We know that we may not get a deal for 12 months, and we're going to manage to that. And we're not going to try to get you to bring it in Q1 when it's forecasted for Q4. Now, it doesn't mean that in Q3 we don't look at opportunities. Can we pull it in? We're always trying to pull if it makes sense, if the customer's willing, and so you can adjust that. But it's expectations are really, really important.
And do you have any particular strategies? Like mine was kind of sandbagging, because I would kind of because what would happen in a mediocre culture was they'd end run the rep and try and pull the deal in by calling high, and then that person at the high level doesn't know who you are or why you're calling.
Right. Yeah. It's yes. I mean, I'm big about managing,
expectations.
Under promise and over deliver. And of course, they don't want you sandbagging, and they're always trying to push you to keep you from it. But it's they know that the other part of strategic selling that's different than transactional is, you can't go twist somebody's arm in the C-suite, and you can't threaten them. I've worked for companies where the leadership, it was all about leveraging and threatening them and taking them. And I'm like, those are the ones that, I've worked for good companies that were bought by people like that, and I didn't have a choice but for a while to work for them till I could get somewhere else. But that's, you see that a lot is you see cultures that their whole thing is, let's just use leverage to try to force our customers to buy from us. I can't work for them very long. When I have to because of an acquisition, I end up getting out of there. But I think it's important, but you can go ask when you're giving day in and day out, and you built these great relationships. You can go to the CIO or CFO or whoever and say, hey, look, we've got this forecasted for next quarter. Can you at least tell us if it looks like everything's ready except maybe your budget? Can you just let me know if there's any chance you could do it? And because you've been a great partner, they're willing to try. Now some won't, but many will. And I've had many do a deal earlier, do a deal bigger, because they trusted us as partners, but it had been proven ahead of time.
Right. It has to be there.
Right. Just to come in and ask for that, or to threaten them because they got a maintenance thing coming up and you're trying to extort money out of them. That you're not going to be in there very long. They're all today, everybody. One thing that's important too is, more and more we're going to subscription software. And subscription software has changed software selling tremendously. What it's done is, in the perpetual software days, you had so many companies, they didn't care whether the customer used the software or not. They would just sell them. They would sell them a ton, and if it got implemented, didn't really matter because they already bought it. Yep. And so there was an article, I think Gartner did a thing about 8, 9, 10 years ago, that 70% of software purchase is never used. Okay, subscription has changed that because they can stop, they cannot renew. So subscription has forced companies to focus on customer success versus let's just try to figure out how we can sell them the most software up front and then go to another account. It is really, and I love that because I've always tried to sell off customer success. And so subscription is kind of forcing companies that don't want to do that. It's forcing them to do it.
Cool. Hey, Russ, I really appreciate your time. What a great interview. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Just go Russ West at VMware. VMWARE is the company I work for, and it's Russ, RUSS, West, WEST.
What were the two things that you got out of this? Here's two of mine. One, when you hear about a problem, either in the industry, with customers, with your product, embrace it. And I found this enlightening because I kind of hate problems. You hate frustration. When things don't work, you get upset. And there's differences. Like there's little nits, Wi-Fi isn't working, or the computer needs to be rebooted, or you're clicking and nothing's happening. But the other things, like when a customer's upset, when a customer's frustrated, when a prospect or something in the industry is happening, this is an opportunity. Why? Because you have active pain. It may not be the kind you like, but it is active. And what you can do is judo it, meaning like go with it, use the energy that's coming at you to both deflect it and move it in the direction you want to. It is an opportunity. And I think that comes from optimism and curiosity. And curiosity, because I'm doing a lot of research on this, a lot of reading, listening, talking to a lot of people about this, trying to come up with a simple system, a step by step, instead of this laundry list of 1,000 things you have to do to become great at sales. What are the exact sequences in the easiest route to get there instead of trying to be everything all the time, no matter what? Now, the problem becomes the conversation point. And too many of us, we try and ignore it, hope it goes away, and sometimes it does. But if we embrace it and turn it into that conversational point. Number two, that helping. Now, you would think that this is, a waste of time, or I may not get anything. And too many of us say, I will definitely help you once you help me. The problem is it turns into a stalemate. And we see this all the time in sales, especially between reps and managers, where, or even employees and employers, I will do more if you give me a raise. Well, you don't get a raise unless you do more. And I always had this equation, because I had this manager who once said his objective was get paid the most for doing the least. And I go, what a losing strategy. And I always had this equation, because I had this manager who once said his objective was get paid the most for doing the least. And I go, what a losing strategy. Because the other person is like, well, wait a second. I keep paying more and I'm getting less. So what do they want to do? They want to pay less. But then there's that one employee who goes above and beyond, way outside their pay grade. And it may not happen, but a lot of times someone recognizes that and gives them a chance, and pays them more than they're worth, gives them an opportunity. Now, with prospects and customers, it definitely works that way. If you're waiting for them to buy before you do, this is what falls apart. And I've had this argument pretty much with most startups I went to, because what they would want to do is, well, why don't you get them to pay for the POC, the proof of concept, the technical sale? And I go, do you realize that's a whole sales process to get a very small amount of money? And what happens if our competitor doesn't require to get paid for it? And I made a lot of money early in my career by just ignoring that and doing the proof of concept kind of underneath the radar, you might say. And you know what? We got deal after deal. Now, you can't do it every time. You do it judiciously. You do it on the best and the most likely deals to close. And you don't do it to be busy. And you don't do it out of charity. You do it because it is the way to stay engaged with the client. It is helping. It is giving. And the devil is in the details, meaning you got to do it right in the right way. But sitting back and doing this transaction thing, I will do it once you do this. Now, don't confuse this with not asking for something. But we typically have to give in sales first, and more than we anticipate. And it tends to come back, not 100% of the time, which is another thing that people confuse in selling and with people in general. Absolutely nothing works 100% of the time with people. If you can get above 50%, you're going to be rich. And what happens is our psychology goes, well, wait a second, it didn't work. Maybe I did it wrong. Maybe you did. Or maybe you did it with the wrong person, or the wrong day, or the wrong way. In the complex sale, we have to find these first principles. The first principles of what really will get the deal moving. Now, in this interview, I hope you picked up the distinctions of if you're making these types of investments, people use the word qualify, but qualify kind of implies that they have to have a lot of skin in the game. But it can be very different. Okay, are they big enough to be able to afford what you're doing? Do they have the problem that you solve? Are they the type of people and company that will be willing to make this and change an investment? And these are judgment calls. These are not checklists. And I hear a lot of people talking about these checklist sales processes. Now, they're not bad, they're just incomplete. And if you go off of the checklist and it doesn't close, is the checklist wrong? Well, it's incomplete. It's not wrong. You checked everything. And people can argue about it. The point is you have to make these judgment calls. You have to give. You have to look for problems and solve them. And if you're looking for a guarantee, you're in the wrong job. Go become an accountant. Go do something that has a guarantee in it. We're at risk, so we have to be hyper focused, hyper diligent, and really think through our strategy. So Brian, how do I learn all this? Well, you can listen to the platitudes and the comfort zone responses that I always just look at the comments I get on my posts. 80% of them are platitudes, meaning that it's just stimulus response. There's no thought that goes into it. Thought is where the power is. Thought is the understanding. In winning the complex sale, you learn exactly how to win these types of deals, how they work internally inside their company, and how you lead them through the process. And I talked to a lot of people. I just did a ton of sales kickoffs and talking to a lot of very experienced reps. And the challenge you have as a rep is you're too close to it. You're in the game. You can't see how the game's being played because you're so emotionally focused and involved in it. So am I. And that you need to take a step back. Look at the whole terrain. Where are you? Who are the players? What's the timeline look like? Why would they do it? Where are the traps? How do I avoid them? How do I guide them through this process and really analyze it? Because if you win, there's a lot of gold at the end of that rainbow. And if you lose, it's an enormous waste of time. Hopefully you'll learn from it. You pay the tuition. Did you get the lesson? Winning the complex sale gives it to you. And people go, well, what's the ROI on it? Well, ask yourself, how many of those deals closed? Look at last year's forecast. Save those old forecasts. They are lessons. They are pure gold. And look at them. Most people, it's like 25 to 40% close. So that means 75 to 60% of your time is wasted. Now take your on-target earnings, not the number that the company gives you in the comp plan, the number you want to make. Say you want to make 500K and you're only closing half of them. You're making 250, okay? Sounds good, doesn't it? That's a good amount of money, but you could have made 500. And you could have had more fun. And you didn't waste your time. And you didn't get those terrible disappointments when you didn't close the deal. Sound good? Also, if you're start the conversation, get the meeting, make sure you're checking out the one-on-ones. There's pure gold there when you watch people go through, because first step is denial, especially with reps. Entrepreneurs pick this up immediately because there's no bad habits. Experienced reps, and the most experienced, fight it the most because It's not because they're difficult. It's because they're so ingrained in the pitch, in the get the meeting, get that 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour demo, that they forget that you need to build. You got to start where they are, not where you are, and make them come to you. They're not going to come to you. If they were going to come to you, they already would have, or they will someday. Our job is to start where they are and build up. And if you listen to the progression, these are all real reps going through really difficult situations. There's nobody in the course selling something that's easy, nor are they at a big brand name where it's just a walk in the door or an upsell. These are getting meetings with very difficult competitive roles and people kind of above, trying to really sell complex stuff, new stuff. And you get to hear that pattern over and over again. And then when you get a breakthrough and you get the smile on their face and they get their first deal or their first meeting with an executive they only dreamed of getting before, and they stop wasting their time going from one meeting a week to 10 or 20 and just have it in a system, boom, 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 becomes unconsciously competent at it after a while. Because the hard part is the change. The hard part is not doing it. The hard part is the change in mindset. But it has to take place. Just like what we heard today in this interview. The giving, the helping, that is counterintuitive. And it's not helping just for helping's sake. It's helping that builds that trust, that connection with that other person, that reciprocation that they feel unconsciously compelled to do. So make sure you're checking out the courses at b2brevenue.com. Everybody who shares my content on LinkedIn, likes it, comments on it, give it a little thumbs up. Oh, you're friends for life. Also, check out the other podcasts, Sales Questions, Brutally Honest Answers, the Sales Leadership Show, B2B Revenue Leadership. This is nothing but pure gold out there. I'm here working for you 24/7. We'll see you next time.
So yeah, I've launched a lot of advertising technology products in my day. And recently I joined the Adobe Lightroom product marketing team, leading that up. And we just had a big launch for a product called Denoise with that. So yes, I've done a lot of launches in the B2B and consumer space. So thought I'd write a book.
Okay, so awesome. So let's start off on the negative. Where do people get this wrong?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, launches, there is a whole section on where you can go wrong and what you can do about it. But I think that the biggest challenge is actually getting the timing right. So especially when you're working at a tech company, often there are cultural differences between the product and eng team and the marketing team. And in order to get those humming together in perfect alignment, it's quite an undertaking. So I think that is a really hard part about just figuring out when you're going to launch, sticking to the timeline so you can make the biggest impact. That's what I see as a big challenge.
Who knew timing was a cultural issue? So we'll revisit that again. So what compelled you, other than you've got this deep experience and you wanted to share it? I mean, is there something that wasn't being said in the product launch space that you really wanted to get into this book?
Yeah, so at the time when I started writing this, I really felt like product marketing was kind of this learn on the job type of mentality. There wasn't a lot of content out there about product marketing. So after leading a team for the very first time, I realized, wow, if they didn't have a Mary to share this experience, they would have been creating things, from scratch, really reinventing the wheel. So I saw a real market need that, hey, if people are trying to run their first product launch, whether you're a product marketer, product manager, or founder of a small business, why not just make it easy and give you the templates and everything to get started? And so the idea of this book is really kind of modeled after a Harvard Business Review guide, where you can just take it in a weekend or in a few hours, and also have a bunch of templates so you can get started. I just really felt like with the right tools and frameworks, you can do this, and it can be a lot easier than just trying to figure it out on your own.
So when people think products, they think, physical box, prototype. But what about information products? I mean, a lot of people launch things that are not, tangible physical things. I mean, does the framework still apply kind of to any type of launch?
It applies to any type of launch, yes. And a lot of my experience is not with not with something you can hold in your hand. It's a technology that you're reading about, or even something like a white paper or an ebook. So this can really work for anything that you are launching.
Why don't we start with, and we can maybe get into a couple of the, but kind of quickly, like, what are the sections? What are the steps involved in it? It's like, first you do this, then you do this. Kind of maybe give us the outline.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I like to do is just get the plan. You get everything in order. Look at the checklist, look at the things that you need to accomplish. And the first piece of that plan to really fill in is around strategic readiness. So no matter what your product is, you really need to understand who you are launching to, what your target market really is, and really understand that audience really well. You need to align the team that's helping you. Maybe it's just you, but aligning anyone that's going to help you with any content creation, and set some goals. I really think that without goal setting, you're really not, what's the point of what you're doing and what's the point of what you're launching? So after that, creating a plan and strategic readiness section, it's about thinking about how you are actually going to bring this to market with the positioning and messaging, as well as what we call the channels that you are going to be marketing to, and making sure that really aligns back to your customers, your target customers. And then finally, it's just executing it, getting that timing right, and getting that message really out there.
So maybe you're going to say, well, that's not really a part of the launch, but what about actually getting the product right? Which probably goes before the launching, but certainly has implications, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I do think in the role of product marketing, it's really important to make sure that you have the right product. And actually, one of the questions I ask up front in the book is, should you be launching this? Are you ready? Do you solve a problem? What is your financial target and model for this? So I do think that there is, a huge effort that goes into the beginning of this, and sometimes launching is actually about launching so you can test and get that feedback. So you might launch something as an alpha or an MVP, minimum viable product, so you can really understand that.
Yeah. So I have launched many products myself. They've all been information products, courses, things like that. Cool. And I've had some real winners and some real losers. And one of the things years ago I learned that if I actually developed my product with my customers, like, do you really want this? Does this make sense? Does this solve a problem? What role does a customer, existing customer base play? I mean, how involved should they be in just what you said? Is there really for this?
Oh, 100% agree with that. And if I look back on any of my launch fails, it's totally been that we've either missed the mark on their customer or we moved so fast that we just left them in the dust and didn't think about it. So I totally agree with that. And so I do think that there should be a really considerable effort in understanding if this product has product market fit. And you do that by talking to customers, by understanding, if this is something that they would actually buy and use. Getting them to really invest in user testing. Is this something, what is it about the experience that you're bringing them in on? Is there anything confusing about it? So yeah, one chapter is actually all about getting to know your customer and scrappy ways that you can research and connect with them so you can make sure that you're not only launching the right product, but talking about it in the right way too.
And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, Marketing Maker. You can license DTM.world market that people don't know they need yet.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think that we're coming up against this really with Gen AI. So many things that are out here that weren't here 6 months ago. Like, I would never have known I needed text to edit to get these beautiful images. So I think prototyping in kind of early phases is so important. And what I think is even more important, though, is understanding what their challenges are. And so they might not be able to articulate to you what they want in terms of a new product, but they can tell you what their pain points are. So you can watch their user workflows. You can actually go, see them where they are and see, whatever type of product it is. If it's at the consumer space, go to their house, see how they're actually doing different things, what they're eating, how they're cooking, or, in the tech space, how they're using their technology. Are they using it on their phone? Are they using it on their desktop? So understanding their challenges, I think, can be a way better way to actually say, okay, this is a need. They don't know what will fix this necessarily, or they're doing this crazy workaround, but we do understand that's a core challenge that we can solve.
Yeah, I love to tell people nobody wants what we sell; they want the problem solved.
Exactly.
If you can connect those two, then great. But otherwise, they don't want it. What if I get it wrong? Unfortunately, I can't think of a great example right now. Maybe you can in your history, but of people that went out and said, "Here it is," blah blah, and the market said, "Well, I don't get it, or I don't need that, but I need this," and they pivot. So with the actual product, I mean, any thoughts on how to maybe even build that in? Like that could be a possibility. How would you address that?
Yeah. Oh, and I always say if you haven't had a major launch fail, you probably haven't been doing it long enough. So even with the best laid plans, that's gonna happen. So I would say fail fast. I mean, admit it, and I think what's so important, like I mentioned about goal setting, having those goals and starting to track that. So you're not just, launching it and saying, okay, great, pop the champagne, we're done here. Really tracking and seeing if you're hitting those metrics. And if you're not, what is going wrong? And really trying to identify that so quickly. So one launch fail example I had was we went to market with a product, had tested it with this user group. It was amazing feedback. And when we went to market, we actually realized no one was buying it because we'd only been talking to the users, not the decision maker. And it did not fit into the decision maker's stack at all. So it took us a little bit of time to figure that out, but once we did, we basically pulled it and decided we needed to go a totally different track, and it morphed into something else that, our actual buyer would purchase as part of their marketing stack. So admit it, move on, figure out how to fix it. And sometimes that's maybe repositioning, or, it could be in any number of things that you need to fix.
Yeah, and one of the things, and this is probably particularly true of smaller organizations, it's a lot of times I think larger organizations have their goals all mapped out and they have like, what's next and what's next. But I think the point you make there is launch is just the beginning in some ways and not the end, but it sort of implies that. But some of the biggest gains that I've experienced is to actually pay attention to not only who was buying, but how they were using it and then what they needed next. And it really, and of course I'd already sold to them. So selling them more was going to be even easier. So, you kind of alluded to that, but it's not just metrics of like, is this selling or not? It's how do you build onto it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think tracking sentiment, how they're using it, what you can improve on, how you can iterate from here is great to be able to kind of map that in as part of your process. Yeah, I kind of think about the product launch process. It's on the cover of my book. It's a mountain. At the peak is the launch, but on the other side, you're descending down that mountain, but there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of things to really figure out until you maybe find that idea for the next launch.
Well, and to carry that metaphor a little farther, I live in the mountains, and one of the things that happens when you climb, a lot of times you're like, oh, there's the top, and then you get close and it's like, oh, that was a false peak. There's a much higher climb, to continue. And I think that's how I use that metaphor all the time for business, because just when you think you've made it, it's like, oh no, there's there's the next peak, or the real peak.
Yes, my wallpaper here shows that as well.
Yeah. So. You said that this was in some ways when I asked you about how to get this wrong, you said timing and team, and you have a whole section on that, although it's the last section. But talk a little bit about the timing aspect and what you mean by that, because it's not just like, oh, fourth quarter is the best time to launch. I mean, it's more complex than that, right?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, one aspect of it, of course, is like, what is the best time to launch seasonality wise, or when not in the middle of summer where everyone's on vacation and won't hear, anything about this. But that's one aspect of it. But the more important aspect of it is product readiness and marketing and aligning that. So sometimes, at tech companies, product managers and engineering teams are used to just shipping things whenever it's ready. But when you partner really closely with marketing, it becomes a conversation about making sure that you're amplifying all of your resources together at the same time to make that big splash. So that might include having new advertising creatives, a whole new website refresh, events, all these kind of things that if you partner together really well. So that means that the product can't go early, which happens a lot, and it also can't go late, or otherwise you don't have anything to talk about at the big event. So actually
2 weeks after the trade show, right? Yeah.
Yeah, not going to be, if you're launching at CES and you don't have anything to launch with, that's not going to fly. So actually connecting those dots is pretty complicated, and making sure that you have milestones along the way and really tight team communication is a way that I found that has made it more successful.
So in larger organizations like Google or Adobe, I mean, is there a head of the product launch that is really trying to bring all of those together?
I think at any size company, there should be a point person. So whether it's the product marketer or the product manager or even the founder, if it's, if you're a small team, I think that there should be one person that's sort of manning the entire end to end. But obviously there's so many partners, depending on the complexity of the launch, that help and kind of assist. But I've always found one point person to be best.
So do product people hate marketing people? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that you can get to be best friends. I think sometimes you walk in the door and product people are like, who's this marketing person? But I think showing that you're trying to help each other. You're trying to actually work towards the same goals. And that's this podcast could be about making product managers your best friends. That's my goal too.
So we have focused a little bit on larger organizations. A lot of listeners to this show are small business owners, founders, maybe solopreneurs in some cases. How would you suggest that this book applies to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have several people that have reached out to me that have small businesses that have said that this has really helped them. And I think that, at the heart of it, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to have a plan. You're going to try to understand who your customer is in, deepest way as possible. And then you're going to execute on that plan. So what this actually provides is a way of thinking about that and a way of constructing a framework to input all the things that you know about your audience, where you can reach them, and how to do it in the most cost-effective way. So it's really about just thinking, hey, maybe you're not going to do a huge trade show event, right, but maybe you're going to make flyers, or maybe you're going to have a smaller event where you have a booth, or maybe you're going to go do, a big launch at grocery stores if you're selling CPG goods. So depending on, what type of product it is, just, really thinking about that end-to-end journey for your customer and where it makes sense.
In a lot of ways, as I listen to you explain that, I mean, you really could take this framework and apply it to some sort of internal initiative too, right? I mean, let's say we're going to switch from, I don't know, one CRM to another or something like that. I mean, you still want to have a plan. You still want to get the buy-in from the people that are going to use it. You still want to get feedback. I mean, it really is, I think it's more universal than just a product launch, so to speak.
I totally agree. And sometimes when I'm doing bigger projects at work, if I'm like, I need to just think about this as a launch, then it kind of all makes sense. So.
Yeah. And it's kind of like journey mapping almost. It's like, what are all the, stages, what are people feeling at this stage? What do they need to hear, to go to this next stage? So I think there's a lot of applications just as a general business framework.
Absolutely.
So you may have already answered this, but I like to leave people with, what's the hardest part about launching a product?
So I think the hardest part about launching is nailing the timing and nailing the customer message. And so I think that, putting some thought into both of those, you will be a lot better suited to launch than you're just winging it.
Yeah. Well, Mary, I want to thank you for stopping by the Duct Tape Marketing Podcast. Where do you want to invite people to connect with you? Certainly to pick up the Pocket Guide to product launches.
Thank you. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Mary Sheehan PMM or on LinkedIn. And the book is called A Pocket Guide to Product Launches. It's available anywhere you buy books, Amazon particularly. And I also have a podcast too, like you mentioned, called Win.
Need a simple, structured, and repeatable process that allows you. And if it's done here is that they're having someone looking to do the full cycle, generating leads, selling those clients, creating proposals, making the closed sale, bringing them on as clients, and trying to do the entire cycle. And quite frankly, it doesn't work. I have never seen it work in any agency that way unless it's the owner. So on top of that is that you actually should not be doing this and actually looking to remove yourself until a minimum of 5 million revenue. And typically over 7 is the place that you start to make an augmentation and bring others to actually take over your sales process. Sure, you may have someone taking over lead gen before then, and that's totally fine. But the sales component typically is the owner for a while. And up until that point, you're refining your system, you're refining your process, you're making sure that you can articulate value, and you're doing things in an authentic way. And so once you start to get there, and I want to walk you through what you want to be considering, what you want to be doing, and how you want to start thinking about setting up that sales system so that it's well refined by the time you get to that stage of growth and you're able to actually make that augmentation. So what I want you to do in the first step is really starting to develop a clear and repeatable process, building a consistent sales system that allows for each person to understand and for you to understand exactly where someone is in that sales cycle, what is the thing that they need to learn about at this stage in the cycle, and essentially having a script. So depending on the call, if you're having an initial qualification call, sort of 15 minutes, having a short qualification call script that you follow is very important. Making sure that you're able to provide value will also confirm that they're a potential client, that you can actually help them, and do so in an excited, eloquent way. The discovery call, which is one of the biggest components to a sales process where someone actually gets to trust you and be able to create some emotional safety with you, is in the discovery call. And one of the things here that's really important is that I so often, in the first agency I ever worked at, and you may have heard this story before, but the first agency I ever worked at, I was in the first sales meeting for an agency, and after the client left, the team was like, rocking their fists saying, hell yeah, we did so well. That's amazing. We definitely sold that client. They're really excited. And just lifting themselves up and telling them how awesome they were. They were telling themselves this. My response to them was, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I was in the same meeting as you, because the client looked completely bored. They did not end up becoming a client. They were indeed bored. They were not engaged. There was not communication. There was not conversation. And I mean, think about it this way, really. If you were to be meeting someone for the first time and all they did was talk about themselves and how cool they were and how awesome they were and all the things that they've done and why you care about them and why you want to be their friend, how fast would you be running out of that door? How much would you actually want to get to know this person more? You absolutely would not. Not even a little bit. And that's what the vast majority of agencies are doing. They have a quote unquote strategy session conversation, and then they just talk about themselves for an hour, pitching the client of why they're awesome and how cool they are and why they do good things and why they're the best of the world at what they do. And there's no relationship being built. And people ultimately buy from people that they know, like, and trust. And if you're not building any of that with them, then you're not going to make the sale. And if you do, you're not going to do it in a way that allows for you to have a long-lasting, meaningful partnership with them. I'm going to add this little asterisk here that depends on the size of company. If you're working with enterprise-sized clients, the augmentation is a little bit different. They still need to know, like, and trust you, but the way that you go about this is a little different. You have procurement trying to remove the emotional buy and all of that. And effective or ineffective, we can argue that point. You need to make sure that they reach what is referred to as conceptual buy-in, and they've made the emotional decision to work with you. They haven't decided that they can afford you. They haven't decided that they are going to necessarily work with you. Then you have both the emotional buy and the analytical buy that comes later on. The next thing that I want to really start for you to think about here now is you need to start thinking about activity-based selling here and really understanding what, and not to be focusing on the goals of, hey, I've got a revenue goal of X. And not saying that that's not important. It absolutely is. You should have those goals and know what they are. But you need to break down what exactly is the activity. And so I talk about this quite often about the idea of interdependence and understanding that if I take X action, then I can have Y result. And the exact same principle applies here, is that if you know that if I do this many, I send out this many emails, I'll generate this many leads. If I have this many calls, I should generate this much revenue. This is my average close rate. This is how long it takes to close a deal. This is the size of deal results in this much of a higher close rate. Like, you can start to analyze the information that you're collecting in every single sales call. But in order to do so, you first have to do it in a very programmatic way, and making sure that you understand what activity you're taking is ultimately allowing for you to be able to get there. And so understanding what those activities are, so you can take the pressure off of your sales team or even yourself and thinking, I just got to sell, I just got to sell, I just got to sell, rather than I need to do this action today. If I do this action today, I know that I'm going to hit my goal. And it removes this lofty weight of the world type feeling on yourself by actually looking at the actions that you need to take today that allow for you to have that end goal. And so look at what activities are actually enacting that and having that outcome that you're looking for. If you don't have some type of CRM, it's very important here. At the very least, you need to be tracking it in some type of spreadsheet, ideally in a CRM, because it just makes your life a whole hell of a lot. And so essentially bringing me to my next point is that ultimately finding technology that scales with you. I'm not saying that I want you to go spend hours and hours and hours. I want to say my implementation of my CRM HubSpot took us and the team company wide somewhere in the 150 hours, maybe more, to implement fully. I'd have to look at the time data from many years ago. It's a large investment into getting that, but incredibly meaningful now for me because I know exactly what happens and who's more likely and why they would and what types of information needs to be served to them and all sorts of things that allow for me to have a much more meaningful understanding of what's happening and be able to project out future revenue in a meaningful way. But you do want to have technology that's ultimately going to scale with you. Make sure that you know what you want to be tracking, what activities you're currently doing, what information is going to be useful, and so that you're actually creating a tool and implementing a tool that is going to grow with you. I'm not saying you need to find a tool that you're going to be utilizing 10 years from now, but at least for the foreseeable future, talking 3 to 5 years out. I don't want you to go, if right now you have no CRM tool, you're not tracking anything, and then you're going to go buy a system like HubSpot that's in the $15,000, $20,000 a year, likely not the best thing for you to start with, but looking at how can you be setting up something that is going to have that meaningful information that allows for you to actually truly scale. The next piece is, having information that allows for you to be able to make proactive decisions. Right? So these KPIs that allow for you to understand what's happening and predict and address any issues that are coming up for you, right? Let's say that lead volume has been down for the past 30 days, or your sales cycle has been extended for some reason, which I'm actually seeing right now happening more and more for lots of agencies. The sales cycles are getting a bit longer. People are being a little bit more cautious in spending. They are still buying. They're just making, and the close rates haven't changed. I haven't seen, but the timeline to close has been longer for many agencies, at least for my clients. May or may not be the case for you, but would be an interesting figure to look at to see if that's happening for you. But understanding these types of things, right? What is the average days to close? What is the average deal value? How many deals do I have in the pipeline? What is the value of those deals? And what is the weighted value? Things like that you can be tracking that understands where you are today and whether that information is going up or down, whether those KPIs are improving or getting worse, so that you understand, all right, I need to start making financial decisions, hiring decisions, marketing decisions, sales decisions. What do I need to do to make an augmentation to what it is that I'm doing that allows for you to actually accomplish your long-term goals as well? And ultimately, many of you, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, if you've encountered any of my content, you clearly know that I'm a very data-focused person. And I believe data to be the core of every decision that you should be making. And not every decision, I would say the vast majority of them, because sometimes it's just, hey, I want to have this life. But from this standpoint, I do not believe in making decisions based on feeling. It needs to be based on trackable metrics, understanding patterns, understanding the data, trusting in that data that guides the decisions that you're making and allows for you to be able to understand fully what you're doing. So what I would do if I were in your shoes, I would be doing a couple of things. I'd first list out what exactly are the stages of my sales cycle. What are the different touch points that I actually have with clients? How many meetings should I be having? Knowing, by the way, that the larger value contracts, the more touch points that you have, the more likely you have to close. So you can build in shorter meetings, more of them that allow for you to be able to build a more relationship familiarity with that prospect that allows for them to be more likely to know, like, and trust you. So you can build those types of things in. So making sure that ultimately you're able to build out that journey, understand what that looks like, and then start to build off of that journey. What exactly are the metrics are you looking at? You do have the very typical ones of pipeline value, weighted value, average days to close, your closure rate, things like that. And ultimately, I would also suggest you break it down by the source of that traffic, or at the very least, the source of the lead, I would say, whether it's a referral, a cold lead, an inbound lead, warm lead, that sort of thing. But you, at the very least, you want to break it down between existing business and new business, because the deals, the way that they close and the timeline to close is typically very different in those two different categories, and making sure that you have the distinction between the two. I want you to think about that. And then I also want you to think about, where are you today? Where are you in your growth? Where am I in revenue? And how am I actually feeling about sales? Do I dislike sales? I just don't like sales? Or do I not like sales because of what I tell myself I have to be a salesperson? I fundamentally and fully believe that the best way to be a great salesperson is to be authentic, to be valuable to your clients, to be really a meaningful advisor, and really be able to help people in conversations that we have with people on an ongoing basis. I mean, and some of you may have experienced this, and there's people that we'll talk to that absolutely are not ready to work with us. And while we could, in theory, sell them, because, we are, I would say, fairly adept salespeople, but we don't, because I don't find that to be ethical, because it would be more damaging than good to them at the stage that they're at. So we give them advice. Go do X, Y, Z. And right now you're not ready, and here's why. And here's what I want you to do, so that when you are ready, we can have a conversation then, should you want to. We're not a pressure sales shop. I would never suggest that you be either. I'm not into it. I don't believe in it. I wouldn't want it. I want to provide people with value. I want to have my business have meaning and impact on people's lives. And I would imagine that you do too. So provide that value. Have the conversation. Don't be pushy, because people will gravitate towards you when you're just wanting to help. And if they see that really heart-centered, that I know this industry to be, I work with so many incredible heart-centered agency owners that just care deeply about the work that they do, incredibly passionate about their work and the impact that they have on their clients, and pivot from there, pivot from value, pivot from help, and you will do a phenomenal job in sales.
I'm working on m/WS for webinar series and register. You can see the full lineup there as well, but being that you're listening to a podcast, you might be a bit more audio inclined. So let me share with you what's in store. We'll be kicking things off at 10 a.m. Central Time with Jamal Reimer talking about your path to enterprise sales, how to hunt whales. Then at 11, Ian Cognac will be talking about the mindset of sales champions. At noon, Steve Haru from the Sales Collective will get inside your with my personal doing. Almost 3 months ago.
Because a lot of times what that turns into are harsh words or violence or impulsive decisions that we regret later. And so we tend to either do that, or some people, if they're worried about the consequences of expressing their emotions, they just bottle them up. And what we found is that, bottled up fear often becomes anger, and anger turned inward often becomes depression. And the only reason I know any of this, because I'm not a mental health professional, I'm an RN, but I've done a lot of other things, and mental health directly is not one of them. But a few years ago, my then teenage daughter became really withdrawn and unmotivated. And for a couple of years, I was the type A overachiever. So I tried everything under the sun to, fix her, from removing privileges to these rah-rah speeches to harsh words, and nothing worked. we were just often at these impasses. And so I was really frustrated and angry because I interpreted that to mean that she was just being this lazy, defiant teenager. And so one day we had this kind of tough interaction, and I just gave in. I sat cross-legged across from her, and I took her hands and I said, I can tell you're in pain. I don't know what it is, and I don't know if you're comfortable telling me, but I want you to know that I'm here and I love you and we're going to get through this. And it was the first time in probably 4 years that she just melted. And, I could just see her just soften, and she gave me this really big hug, and she never said a word. But her eyes were kind of shiny, and I thought, okay, I got through to her in this moment, but I finally got there.
Pierced that armor.
Yeah. And so I really still just had no idea what I was dealing with or what was going on. And I was raised as someone who was taught to work really hard and ignore emotions and, just be very stoic. So a few days later, she came to me with this sheet of paper on a clipboard, and she said, I know you want to help, and maybe this will help you help me. And it was a cheat sheet, and it had 3 columns on it. And the first column showed her behaviors, which were things like laying in bed all day or slamming her bedroom door or, refusing to interact with the family. And then the middle column interpreted what that behavior meant, like I'm feeling insecure or I'm stressed or I feel worthless. And then the third column said, here's what I need in that moment when I'm experiencing that feeling. And the crazy thing was, it was the simplest things ever. It was things like, take my phone away and just really gently invite me to go on a walk. Or give me a cup of tea and just grab my hand and say, hey, you're enough. You're going to do great. You're perfect. Or just tell me to call a friend. And I was so blown away because all those years that we kind of struggled, I just thought there were complicated answers, and it really wasn't that complicated. And so we started using her cheat sheet, and it just completely changed, all the things I was frustrated with just melted away. And we have this incredibly close relationship now, but the neat thing is that out of that, we created this app. And the goal of the app is for someone to go in, log their mood, and then the app actually notifies a supporter. So, in our case, it notifies me when she's having some difficult emotions. But then it gives a quick, easy action step to help reset that feeling. And the whole concept behind that is that what we don't want to do is bottle up our triggers in that moment or react aggressively to them, right? Because if we bottle them up, they become these really heavy emotions that build up into these dark moods, which is what was going on with her. So she had just been bottling all sorts of things up, and then it turned into 3 difficult years where she just was very unmotivated and really depressed a lot. So what we found is that if we can share our emotions with someone who cares in the moment when we're having them and take an action step, those 2 things together have this really incredible instant healing effect. And, of course, I wanted her to go to therapy. I wanted her to start medications, and she was really resistant to those things. But what we found is that even though therapy is great and medications are great, and I'm a big proponent of those things, those sessions are usually a couple of weeks apart, and they tell you to do all these really good things like journal and meditate and exercise and sleep well. But for her, the day-to-day accountability on all of those things was really tough. And so we built all of those things into the app and tried to make it really fun so that as you're doing those kinds of things, you're earning badges and you're gaining levels and you're growing as you do it. So that's kind of the app in a nutshell.
Neura Boot in Fire Nation. That's Neura Boot.
But when we do repetitive behavior, they become very kind of hardwired in. So it's like highways in your brain. And so when you consistently do something like meditation every day or journaling every day or, positive affirmations every day, you actually rewire that pathway and then it takes a new course, and it really does over time change your thought patterns, which then changes your behaviors. And so the concept was that we're going to do a quick reset of the brain with these action steps and this reaching out to a supporter, and then over time, as you do these daily steps, you're going to really rewire your brain. So it's like a computer. You know, when you reboot the computer,
that fixes everything. It just is like, hey, this is blinking, I'm going to reboot. And then you call up, tech support. They're like, have you tried rebooting your computer? I'm like, of course I did.
Yes.
Love
Exactly.
that name. Love the explanation. And Fire Nation, as I've been listening to up.
Absolutely. And this is a part that's really exciting to me because it's a concept that I've never seen or read anywhere. But I'll start by saying this. We're all familiar with physical pain. When you're little, we're all taught, don't put your hand on a hot stove.
Right.
Well, fortunately, if you do put your hand on a hot stove, it hurts and then you back away, right? But if it didn't hurt, what would happen?
We'd get burned really badly.
Yeah, I mean, your hand would just shrivel up into a bunch of ash and you wouldn't have a hand anymore. So physical pain keeps us alive. It keeps us safe. Emotional pain is a little more complicated, but it really has a similar purpose. And triggers actually occur when our strongest personality traits feel threatened. So physical pain keeps us alive. Emotional pain keeps us authentic to who we really are. And I know this is kind of a hard concept to wrap our brains around at first. But when I first started really fleshing this out and experimenting with different individuals on it, what I like to do is I start with having a person identify for me what they feel are their top 3 core personality traits. So I'd love to give you a list, but it's like 20 traits long, so it's things like comfort, acceptance, attention, new challenges, control, autonomy, fun. Each person has these personality traits in different proportions, and that's what makes us really unique as individuals. So for me, when I look at a list of these 20 traits, the ones that stood out for me, especially when I started doing this a few years ago, were control, the need to be right, and new challenges. And those 3 personality traits are extremely helpful in my position as an executive. But what I found is that they're also really problematic in relationships, right? Because if your need to be right is a stronger personality trait than your need to be loved, it can actually cause some hurdles at home.
Yeah.
But once you understand that, it actually really changes the way you handle conflict. So for me, I would be in an argument and I would feel this wave of anger coming over me. And then for the first time ever, I could stop and recognize that I didn't feel it necessarily because the other person was wrong. I felt it because I have this strong need to be right. And in that moment, I was then able to control that and think, wait a minute, if I feel this feeling because of my strong need to be right, is it really worth it to destroy the relationship simply to prove my point? And once I realized that, the anger feeling would actually completely subside, and then I could be much more calm and rational about handling the situation. I didn't have that reactive process going on inside of me anymore.
So Fire Nation, I hope that you're really able to put yourself and help us to learn through that process. Things for our business, more leads, faster sales, and better insights so we can serve our customers at the highest level. We use and attention and service team of business. You can do all of. Here's an example. Fire talking about
one of the items that we'll be adding soon to our website, which is just www.neuroboot.com, is a link to actually download this triggers method that we're talking about. So it's this quick and easy process, and it has the acronym STEADY. And literally in less than 3 minutes, you can learn how to recognize and navigate your own triggers. And it becomes such a fun process, right? Because I actually came to a point where I started looking forward to situations where I felt triggered because I wanted to practice the steps in the STEADY method. Because it's such a neat feeling for that wave of frustration or anger to melt away, and then you feel your power coming back and you're able to just really handle any situation with a lot of poise and calm. So a fun example of this, after we developed this very early on, I was driving in the car one day with my 12-year-old, and my grown daughter calls me and she's crying and hysterical because she had this really rough day at work. And she's telling me, I feel like a failure and I feel worthless. And she's just beside herself. And I pull over and I say, okay, I hear you. And I hear the pain in your voice. And we're going to walk through this. And so I remind her what her 3 core personality traits are when she did this method. And when I say that, obviously we have way more than 3 personality traits, but these are the 3 that most resonate with you. And for her, those are the need to be appreciated, the need to be valued, and fun. And so we walk through the steps of our triggers method. And again, it's a really short process. And so part of it is I walk her through really feeling the emotion that's in her body and identifying, the physical sensation. Is it in your stomach? Is it in your head? What do you actually feel? And then really going into that feeling and appreciating it, because understanding it the fact that it's very similar to physical pain, we need to acknowledge it and then recognize that it's there because there's some core value to her that feels threatened. And we have to address that in order for that feeling to go away. And after we walked through it, within 3 minutes, her voice just completely changed over the phone. You could literally, even though she's over the phone, you could almost see her shoulders relax and her head come up just from the tone of her voice. And you could just tell that whole emotional storm was gone. And she recognized that really all that was going on was that she made a mistake at work, but that feeling of that making of the mistake created in her a feeling of feeling really threatened for her needs to be appreciated and valued. And that then resulted in all this fear and panic. So once she acknowledged it and released all the emotion, then she immediately came up with a plan for, okay, here's what I'm going to do. When I get to work tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell my boss and I have this plan. And in going through that plan, now her need to be appreciated and to be valued is intact, right? She has a plan for handling that and still meeting those needs of hers. And so the funniest thing about that is that my 12-year-old's in the car and she hears this whole exchange and she says, what is this? I need this. Tell me more about this method. And so I said, okay, give me an example of something that triggers you. And she said, when you tell me to go clean my room, sometimes, even though you say it nicely, I go in my room and I just get into a corner and I cry and I cry and I cry. And then eventually I go clean my room. And I was absolutely stunned because she is this really tough type A kid who's really self-driven. And I've never seen her cry. I didn't even know she was capable of crying. Man. I had no idea. And so, we talked through it and I had her go through the 20 traits, which ones of these, really apply to you. And we found out her most dominant trait was autonomy. And suddenly it all made sense. Because when I tell her, hey, go clean your room, she is so triggered because she's like, I already know I need to clean my room and I was going to do it. I was going to do it tomorrow. But now you've told me and you've really made me angry.
I resonate with that. If my parents are listening to this right now, they're like, man, that sounds like John.
That's so funny. And so once we talked through it, I said, hey, autonomy is a wonderful trait. If you want to be a leader, you have to have autonomy.
Totally.
And so that's awesome. And so now it's become such a joke with us because now if I tell her to do something, she feels that rush of that feeling and then she gets this funny look on her face and then she'll just start laughing. And she's like, okay, I know that feeling. I know that it just means my sense of autonomy is being triggered and I can just let it go now. Yeah, I do need to go clean my room. And so she just gets on with it. But it's been such a neat way to really prevent and dissolve conflict in the house because we have such a much better understanding now of why we all feel the way we do.
One thing that really jumps out to me is why this would really cause an explosion of
go into her room and cry, then she'd feel guilty about it. So I think a lot of times when we have these uncomfortable emotions, we don't know what to do with them and they make us feel like we're bad people. We feel guilty, we feel shame. We just don't really know how to handle it or what to do. So once you can identify that that feeling that you have is because one of the things that makes you who you are is feeling threatened. And you now have the power to make sure that you maintain your authenticity. It really makes you feel so much stronger about who you are. If you can, going back to the example of my older daughter, she realized I have a need to be appreciated and a need to be valued. And the way I explain it to a lot of people is whatever your core personality traits are, those are also the gifts that you bring to the world. It's who you are. So if you have, you know, if your core personality traits are control and new challenges and a need to be right, you're probably going to be a great CEO. Um, if you're like my daughter who has a need to be appreciated and to be valued and to be, to do something that's fun, you know, you are probably the kind of person that makes sure all your friends feel that way too. You're the person that's sending out care packages and remembering everyone's birthday and taking care of people. And I think when someone realizes what really makes up who they are and how they're wired, there's a lot of power and confidence that comes from that. And it really makes them want to further develop their gifts and share those with the world.
So, Suzanne, you've been sharing a lot with the FIRE.
3 months ago.
Podcast. This is your host, Ralph Burns, and this is the show where we share cutting-edge strategies on acquiring leads and sales to acquire more customers for your business through traffic. And on this episode, pretty excited about this. This is going to be a new series we're going to be doing, not maybe every week, but is our client success owner. The CSO is one of the most important positions at Tier 11 because they're the linchpin between our clients and our team who ensures smooth communication and excellence in service delivery. When I built this company 10 plus years ago, I always wanted to have a virtual organization that has strong company culture and a client-centered focus that really took things to the next level, but also enabled purpose-driven businesses to achieve their vision through what we do every single day through customer acquisition amplification. So if this sounds like you and you have the skills required to be an awesome client success owner, head on over to tier 11 /jobs, tier11.com /jobs, fill out the CSO application. We'd love to talk to you about how you can take your career and our client success to the next level. So anyway, you're the Henry Ford of Google advertising here today, John.
Hopefully I'll be the smart Henry.
Yeah, the wicked smart Henry before he turned into the strange Henry later on in his life. Tell us how we're wasting our PPC ad spend. What are the top ways? Because this is something that people are really, it's obviously we've done many episodes on fears of loss, and especially right now with the financial situation and the economic situation of tad uncertain. We don't really know what's going on. People are looking for ways in which to save a few dollars in their spend. Google obviously is something that you know here, but what are the big ways that people can effectively implement new ways now in order to save that spend and continue to grow their businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've labeled out a few here that I think that are important just because everyone knows don't overspend on bad keywords and your negative keywords out, and make sure you're not remarketing your existing purchasers. So we kind of have the standard that I think we've already covered in other episodes, or you've covered in episodes. So I'm going to take it kind of one step down the rabbit hole and talk about a little bit more that you may not see. So things that are a little bit more advanced, things that you may not have had the ability to identify because you're not using the same tool set that I am, but you're still going to be inheriting those same fallacies and fail points that I have identified here that I want to share with you all. So we're going to be covering a couple things like the Performance Max YouTube display brand, and we're going to talk about a little bit deeper into things that, ROAS itself won't tell you, or omni-channel visibility you're not going to have with inside of the Google Ads ecosystem. The first one I wanted to talk about is PMAX on existing website traffic. Now, this is not existing customers, which is getting more and more well known, but it's existing website traffic. the delta between the new visits and visits are going to be your existing existing traffic visits. Now, the bad part about PMax and the bad part about Google is looking specifically just at new customer acquisition cost inside of a PMax campaign doesn't mean that it started there. Your Google will tell you if you got a new customer. Even Northbeam or Triple Whale will tell you that you got a new customer inside of a specific campaign. However, did they start at that performance max is where you're going to be identifying, is this performance max actually working for me or not? Is it simply just inserting itself halfway through the conversion path and taking 100% of the credit? Did they start on organic? Did they start on Facebook? Did they start on Instagram? Even YouTube, for example. So there's going to be other paths that are going to be starting those users that PMax is going to take 100% credit for inside of Google if it started on Facebook, or it's going to take 50% of the credit for if it started on, let's say, a search campaign. So one of the areas that you're going to want to look at is PMax too heavily remarketing omni-channel users, which means do they click on Facebook and then does PMax get the second, third, I've seen them as long as 37 and 40 click paths before you're able to actually identify if a person is converting or not. And one of the tools, obviously, that we use quite often is going to be Northbeam. I think that's one of the best ways to identify a conversion path because this specifically talks about click paths. And I think click paths are important to identify because the view to click path is not something we're talking about. This is specifically, did they click on one channel and then did they click in another channel? Because each channel is obviously going to take 100% of the credit. But when you look at it from a CMO or a business person or a good marketer's view to say, well, what is my cost per acquiring a first-time customer? Too much overlap is going to greatly drive up the expenses of that cost. So you have too many clicks in Facebook and then too many clicks in Google, or vice versa. So that's one of the areas that I think is overspending, is because we're using the best we can, which is, well, my CPO is low, or the cost per order, or my CPA is low, or my ROAS is high. You're missing out on those very long click paths that are overlapping. So I'll share screen here, and I wanted to share this. This is the individual click paths based off of the client. So for example, on the screen here, I have a $31 sale. They had a first click in PMax, then they had 3 email clicks, then they had 7 more email clicks, then they had a Facebook Advantage shopping, then a brand click, and then another PMax click, and then another Facebook click. So,
John, just to pause you real quick, out of curiosity, they got a PMax click and then an email click. So does it stand to reason that the subscription came off of that PMax click, or could they have been previous subscribers? PMax is the first recorded interaction, and then they came back via email, or there's just no way to know?
No, they could absolutely be an existing customer already. This could be a branded search. This is actually my PMax campaign that I've dedicated to majority of my branded searches. I have about 25 PMax campaigns in this account. This one is just my branded one. That's where that overspend is going to go crazy, is because, for example, inside of Google, I had a PMax click and then a branded click and then a same PMax click. Well, this is where we get into the deeper conversation about data-driven attribution inside of Google Ads. Google Ads is removing first click, time decay, linear. They're only giving you last click or data-driven. Like their position base is gone too. Like they're removing all of those. So what's interesting is you're going to have position based and last click, which favors PMax because it always shows up halfway through the funnel on a new customer. And this is just an example of how often this happens. But to the person that may be thinking, well, Performance Max ROAS is really good. Yes, but was it new? Could be. This person could have seen a Facebook ad 15 times that day and Googled the brand name. Now, there we go. That happens all the time. Now, did you get a new customer? Sure. Was it cat good? Absolutely. Where to start? I have no idea. That's where the overspending is unidentified. So what's interesting about this is if we're using a data-driven attribution, we have 2 clicks in PMax, 1 click in brand. 66% of the sale is going to be given to PMax. Because PMax are usually 50 to 60 cent clicks, this is probably going to cost me about a grand total of $2. Well, if you think about an average order value of 40, that's a fantastic ROAS. So when looking at click paths, when you're looking at your actual modeling of your marketing, in this specific client, I spend very little in Performance Max, and I spend a lot more in standard shopping because I have brand excluded. I know that the click paths are always a first click in my entire path sequence that could not have been a branded search click. And then you'll see Performance Max start to scoop up those people afterwards. It does a lot of the remarketing and a lot of the return brand. That's okay. So I use standard shopping to get a high CPC click that has a very terrible ROAS, because that campaign is only going to get one click. Unless you do a bunch of cold traffic searches and keep clicking on my shopping ad, for example, you're really only going to search for something, click on the shopping ad, find out who the company is, and then that job is done with that standard shopping campaign. Then it turns into PMAX. You can have a high ROAS on PMAX, low daily ad spends. Your ROAS could be 1 to 2,000. That's fine, but don't scale that. That's not where they're starting. So identifying the starting point is going to be very important for PMAX. So you're not wasting the ad spend there simply just by saying, can PMAX reinsert itself in your 7 different marketing channels that you're currently running? An easy identifier of that is looking at the new users and the total users. If it's 80% cold, if you're using Northbeam or even Triple Whale, they should give you a new and all visitors. And you should have, for an example, at a minimum, 10,000 users, 8,000 new. And it should be usually one pixel that's installed across all your channels. PMAX can work very, very, very well. It absolutely can. When they're a new user to the site, based on the pixel of the attribution software, it means, no, we have not seen this person coming from a Facebook click or an Instagram click. So that's the first thing I want to look at, is having at least 75 to 80% of the PMAX traffic be new. I've seen it all the way down to something as 40%, where it's like 10,000 users, 4,000 new. Don't scale that. That's half warm. Now, the other part that you want to look at too, though, is if it is at a high new user count, is the search categories heavy brand? Because if so, it's still going to be quote unquote new users to the site, and it will still have a good return on ad spend, or it will have a good MER. But if you look at the actual search categories, if it's heavy brand, that's indicative that they're not starting there. They already knew about you somehow. It could still be a new click to the site. Don't be confused by new users. That's just the first touch point. Where is the first visual? Was it from YouTube? Was it from Facebook? Was it from Instagram? All of those things that could not be associated by a click can be eliminated in your mind by looking at the search categories and say, well, it's cold traffic. It's not brand. There is some brand in there. That's okay. But it's majority cold traffic search terms, and the users are 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 5 is a first time click. That's how you can really reduce the wasted ad spend in Performance Max when you're looking at omni-channels, those two figures there.
You've been listening to Perpetual Traffic.
Welcome to the Magnetic Marketing Podcast. Today we get to listen as Dave D interviews.
That video that you did about how to shave properly was unbelievable. And you probably don't know this, but I'm actually following that procedure right now. I got a mirror for inside the shower, got the oils, did the whole thing. So
awesome.
Really cool. So welcome to the call.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Yeah, I'm glad you saw that video, and it's kind of shocking. I have guys literally come up to me. Happens about once a week on the street, wherever I'm at, saying, "Hey, I saw that video. Thanks, I'm following that, whatever." I never would have thought to do some of those things, and yeah, so it's pretty cool. And by the way, I think we had Mr. Kennedy until you started mentioning all my academic accomplishments, which I think that's about when he probably just ejected this out of his CD player.
Yeah, exactly right. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about your core business and what that's all about, and then we're going to get really into the discussion about how you accomplish all the things that you accomplish and how you've done it at such a young age as well.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm about to turn 40, Dave. So you're going to date me.
No, you're not that young. You know what it is? It's the way you take care of your skin, I guess, with all the barber shop stuff.
It's clearly that. For years, I've told people, I'm the best looking 65-year-old they've ever seen. But I'll make it real simple because I know you don't want me, and nor do the listeners want me to get into all the technical detail because it'll make their head spins. But basically, I finance commercial property for business owners and entrepreneurs all around the U.S. That's all I do. That's what I like to do. I don't want to deal with the indecision committee process crap of large organizations. I like to work with small business owners. I get great personal satisfaction working with them. I consider myself a small business owner, so these are my people, and I like to work with my people. And basically what we do is we create wealth for them, usually lasting generations in the way that we do it, the smarter financing that we provide. So that's what we do, Dave.
Yeah, and you do it really well. And I think one of the keys is that you're really passionate about this. You really love this business. You go to your office and you've got pictures all over the place of all of the different buildings that you've helped entrepreneurs get in.
That's right.
And you've worked with people who are in our mastermind group to help them out, and so you've got a real passion for it. How did you get started though in this? And so let's go back to, was there ever a time, Chris, that you were struggling?
Was there ever a time that I was struggling? I feel
or were you
like
just a superstar? Or were you just a superstar right out of the gate? I mean, seriously. I mean, I think it's an important.
Yeah, it's an important question. I'm going to try not to have my Roy Firestone moment and cry or anything on this call. I think I grew up in a pretty working class neighborhood outside of Peoria, Illinois, so downstate Illinois. People know Peoria from Caterpillar. That's the world headquarters, as long as they can keep it. And I grew up in a broken home, and I started working when I was 8, and I've pretty much been working ever since.
Wow.
I call that hustling. Back then it was, your typical thing that most, I think teenage kids do in the Midwest, which is, let's call lawn maintenance, which means in the spring and summer you're mowing grass, in the fall you're raking leaves, and in the wintertime you're shoveling snow. And so I did that. It's actually kind of funny. I learned early on to fire my first customer, or one of my first customers, when, and it's going to sound horribly crass here, but when a little old lady had me shovel both of her driveways. She barely used one, but she wanted to have the other one cleaned, and a driveway would take a while when you're 8 years old. I mean, it's not just like a sidewalk, right? And she wanted to pay me like $5, and I probably spent like an hour and a half, and I'm like, you know what? Sorry, I did it this one time. Thanks for the $5. I will be avoiding your house in the future snowstorms. So but
you know what's cool about that? Because Dan is always talking about marketing and selling to the affluent. And so even at your young age, that's what you decided to do.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, I mean, it kind of happenstance. I think you just get pissed off, and you're like, well, geez, I could have done 4 sidewalks, homes, and made $10 each for what you just paid me. So, yeah, sometimes you learn by trial by fire, I guess. So I don't know. I just, I've been always working, and I think I did grow up kind of young. I was kind of, I didn't get kicked out of the house or any time, but I basically, I've been pretty much working since then, and had a job or multiple jobs. I actually had multiple jobs many times, and was active in school and sports and all the other stuff. So, and I pretty much left home at 17, and only go back to visit every once in a while, that sort of a thing. It's one of those things in downstate Illinois. You don't have a ton of choices, and in most cases, you got to get out of town. It's a great place to grow up, but you got to get out to go to the big cities and do your thing. So, but yeah, I mean, Dave, I've had what you're calling failures along the way every once in a while. I mean, I don't like to even use that word, because I think every time you fail, there's hopefully a lesson there if you look hard enough. And so I just feel like they're bumps along the road, little things here and there. Learn from it. Try not to do, if it was a stupid thing, try not to do it again. Move on, and be smarter the next time.
Now, you're involved in a lot of different projects, from the barber shop to your core business. I just saw a video of you speaking before the Senate. You're creating unbelievable marketing materials all the time. You're in the process of writing a book, which is coming out.
Yep.
So I guess the first question I really have for you is, what are some of the strategies you use to keep all of this straight? And just so the folks on the call understand this, Chris is running, quote, a real business. I mean, he's got well, no, it's important. I mean, you're not a guy working out of your bedroom.
No, I've got
anything
25.
Wrong with that?
Yeah, no. I've got 25 employees, 7 part-time employees in one business, and the other business, technically, since they all effectively report to me, I mean, we're probably pushing, 70, 80 employees in that business, in Kennedy's business. That's a franchise, but still. So how do I keep it all straight? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, how do you keep it all straight, get it all done? Because I think another important point that we need to make here is the balance that you have. In your life.
My running joke is, and then I'll give you behind it, is I'm a Gemini, so it depends on what hat I put on. So I can at least do 2 things at any given time. But the reality is, and this kind of harkens back to what I said earlier, and I should have elaborated, is I'm one of these guys, and I don't know what it is. I'm not sure where I get it. You know, if you were to have my mother on the call right now, Dave, she'd say, I don't know how he does it, where he gets it from. It doesn't get it from me. You know, I've been telling him he's been burning the candle at both ends since he was 10. So far, I haven't burned out yet. But I think success is an obligation. In other words, I think we have a duty to give it all we got in whatever it is that we do. Now, and a lot of the listeners, and I know you probably share this view with me, and a lot of your listeners will too, but we're very different. We're not like the mediocre majority that's out there who are never going to listen to these CDs. I mean, the reality is, I just think that, I don't know, and we can get into spiritual and religious things if you want, but really, I just feel like you're given this life and you got to bust your ass, and you ought to try your best and give it everything you got. And so I view that as kind of my walking around life philosophy. And so how do I keep it straight? I mean, I hire good people. I mean, I've been very fortunate and very blessed to have a lot of the staff with me for a long time. Now, as you probably remember, I've involved them in a lot of things over the years. You know, for years I used to take a number of my staff to the GKIC events, partly because I wanted to accelerate their learning curve so they knew how to handle me more and work with me and deal with me more. And that's worked very, very well. I mean, I was one of the first IBAs a long, long time ago, and part of the reason I did it was because I wanted my staff to help participate, at least my marketing staff, in a lot of those meetings, the marketing of the meetings, the running of the meetings, listening to what happens at the meetings, and we've benefited considerably by that. It wasn't just as to make money; it was also to sort of leverage what I already have. So those are some of the things that I've done. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And just on to that, one of the things that no one has ever talked about on these calls, and I think it's really important, and I'd like to get into a little bit of detail about it, is how you use interns. Because you've got a very, very unique way of using interns. First of all, why did you decide to use interns? Second, how do you find the interns? And then third, what do you have the interns do that could be applicable to anyone who's looking to bring people on board?
Okay, so interns. When I started my main company, Mercantile, about 10 years ago, I wanted to, and again, I you know, we're going to go back and forth with like my personality and my background and stuff, but I'm not a real how do I put this? I'm not one of these guys that just does whatever somebody says. I'm not a good follower. I know when to follow, and everybody has to follow at some point. They can't lead all the time, but I'm not the most respectful individual of authority figures. You know, it was funny when I was in grade school. They didn't know what the hell to do with me. I went to public grade school. I used to get A's in every subject, and was bored out of my mind, and was basically sort of the guy in the corner that would tell the bad kids, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you go do this? I was sort of like the mastermind of all the bad shit that they did. And so that's kind of what I did. And so I usually would get C's, D's, and F's in conduct. And in fact, I oftentimes talked my way out of F's in conduct up to D's, and you know, my mother didn't know what the hell to do with me, and I mean, literally, she was just at a loss. And so I remember distinctly when I was in 8th grade, I found out that I would not get graded on conduct when I went to high school, and I was so excited by that. I just thought that was a great, great thing. And so I guess the reason I bring all this up, Dave, is I've sort of been defying convention, and I don't really fit into sort of the norms all the time, and it's stayed with me for a long term, still to this day, and that actually, believe it or not, is the genesis of why do I have interns. Well, when I started this company 10 years ago, I didn't want to be like every other commercial bank, okay? I wanted to do things a little bit different. The problem in the banking community is, you know, if you've seen it, bankers, they jump around. They go from one bank to the next bank to the next bank. I mean, I have somebody in town here I've known for probably 12 years, and she's on her 8th bank in 12 years. It's like, wow. I mean, and you know, they try their best to move their clients with them when they move, but at some point you get a little irritated by it, and it just, you know, it's silly. My point is they all take their baggage with them as well, okay? And so when I started this company, I wanted to hire people that would sort of join me in the revolution, okay? And what I mean by that is they would be young, enthusiastic, energetic, hopefully smart folks that I could train my way, and my way is a little bit different because I've been in the industry long enough. I know what works and what doesn't work, and we're going to try and focus on not tradition, but we're going to focus on what works, what gets us our results, period. And if getting us our results means we're going to do things that hardly anybody else does in the industry, then that's okay, and we're going to be fine with that. Okay. Well, if you try to sell that, that viewpoint on a 50-year-old, you're probably going to fail. But you can sell it on new college grads. You can sell it on college kids, especially now that they can't find jobs in a lot of places. And so that's where we started. I was literally in like a 250 square foot office that actually now is a copy room. That shows you how small it was. And it was myself and my first hire, and she had just graduated. And then I immediately wanted to hire an intern because I knew that for me, our internship program has never been what people think of as interns, going and make coffee and getting dry cleaning and walking the dog and making copies and all that kind of crap. For me, our internship program is really an apprenticeship program. So if they prove themselves to me, and I'm going to give them real responsibilities, I'm going to give them real tasks to do that are meaningful to our business, and oh, by the way, I pay them, okay, which again was just kind of a novelty. I mean, they're so much more grateful when you actually pay them, and most of them are getting college credit anyway. But if you'll do all this, you find your future employees. I mean, it's basically an audition, and that's how I always viewed it, and that's why I'm now had Dave. I just looked at it the other day. We are now on our 63rd and 64th interns that we've hired. Those are two new ones for this summer. We've actually got, I think we've got 4 this summer. And so, and we'll have another one joining us later this summer, who's a friend of yours and mine. It's his son who's going to come spend about 6 weeks with me in Orlando. And of those, I've actually hired as full-time employees. I think we're up to like 13 of them that were former interns that have become full-time employees. Now, that's not a huge percentage, but it's decent enough. I mean, what is that, like 15%, 20%, something like that? I mean,
right.
It's pretty decent. And, and they know how I operate. And we sort of have I'll call it an onboarding program where we give them what we call our intern survival guide. And it's, I've shared this before I know you've seen it before, but I mean, it basically talks about who we are as a company, our philosophy, what we expect. I mean, something simple like, and I'm looking at it right now, be on time, be busy. And when we say be busy, find useful things to do. Be curious, be excited, because I try to hire for attitudes much more so than I do for skills. I can teach them the skills, but the attitude is crucial. Take notes. So one of the things that's in this little book it talks about, and there's actually pages, blank pages, lined pages for notes, is you should, somebody said years ago, you should never go in a meeting with Chris without a pen and a paper. Because he's probably going to give you something to do, or he's going to say something you're going to want to remember. And if you can't write it down, you're going to forget it. It's just human nature. And so all these different things. Another one is be in touch. Basically it's what, if we have to ask, what are you working on, that's not very good. So it's just little simple things like that. There's a few little quotes in here as well. But that's something that we developed years ago. And I think it's what produces terrific future employees, and frankly, we're populating a lot of other companies here in Orlando, but also around the country with our high-quality former interns who learned a lot. And it wasn't just how do you take your coffee, Mr. Hearn? I mean, it was a
right.
substantial experience, and I think that's important. And again, I feel it's my obligation. If I'm going to look to bring on a new team member, then I need to do all I can for them, giving them a good experience, and hopefully they're going to return it.
Okay, so that is just brilliant. I mean, that's a short course on really how to work with interns and how to get them on board and hire them and get them up to speed. Let me just dig a little bit deeper here, because it's just such a fascinating subject that I don't think enough business owners tap into this resource.
Right, I agree.
So somebody comes on, and so, for example, at GKIC, we just are bringing on an intern. She just graduated from University of Texas. We're bringing her on. How should we work with her? Who should she report to? What kind of things should we have her be doing, and how much supervision does she need?
Okay, well, just off the top of my head, She probably should at least partially report to a senior person like you. Doesn't mean you got to spend a lot of time with her. Half hour to an hour a week tops. Give her some real tasks. I don't know exactly what you're going to have her do. Is she a marketing intern?
That's correct.
Okay. Have her write some copy. One thing I've found is the university system in this country does not teach people how to write well at all. It doesn't matter if you majored in English Lit, if you majored in accounting, you're just terrible writers. So they've got to learn that skill, and you're going to have to spend a little bit of time, you or somebody else is going to have to spend a little bit of time with her. Important that they understand that they're not in academia anymore. There's a certain way that you write in academia that's vastly different than the way you and I write when we write copy. And usually, because you actually do a lot of the same things I do, which is you and I tend to communicate and write copy that's very conversational. Well, they don't learn that anywhere else. Okay, so you're giving her a skill set right there, whether she becomes a future employee for you or she goes somewhere else. It's very, very valuable. When you give her responsibilities, give her time frames. This is what the previous person did, and this is how long they took. This is roughly what I expect. Little things like that.
Well, one of the things that you said, Chris, which was, and again, it really struck me, is when I wrote down earlier that you said, give them real tasks, but
right.
You're talking like real tasks, like writing copy. I mean, that's a real task. So something that someone would actually do if they were part of the marketing team.
Yeah, I mean, now it's going to be crap.
Of course.
First time around.
Right.
But, you're probably at the same point I am, which is it's a heck of a lot easier for you to edit what somebody else started, unless it's absolute garbage, than it is to start from scratch. And
right.
so, and frankly, it's a teaching moment. I mean, you're trying to explain, here's why this sentence doesn't make any sense, or you need to add more personalization here, or how about you think about starting this, or, oh, by the way, here's my cheat sheet of some openers or some headlines, or see what you can do with this, and let's do some bolding and some underlining, and the same thing. But
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you want to give them real stuff. Now don't have them talk to your banker on the phone or try and balance your books or anything like that. But I mean, there is real contribution that can come from these young people, and frankly, that's how they learn. If you don't give it to them, how are they going to learn? It doesn't happen by osmosis.
Right. I mean, that is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So we could talk about this all day. Maybe we'll have another call, another training about this, because it's huge. And I mean, you use them and you hire them, and like you said, you're creating great employees.
And it's something like 30% of the young people today, and I'm saying that's like 18 to I think it's like 30, are underemployed. I just saw that statistic the other day. 30% of them are underemployed, meaning they either work part-time, they work at a job that they don't like, that they just took for the money, and it's not something that they wanted to do, or they're unemployed entirely. I mean, that's terrible. So wow. My point is, there is a whole population of people that you could get that won't cost you as much, because even though you pay the intern, you're not paying them like what you would a full-time staff person. Okay. And you're trying to figure out, it's an audition. Is this somebody who should be here with the team going forward or not? I just hired a guy, as you know, who's the son of one of our mastermind members, who interned first, did an outstanding job, worked his way into a position. I actually didn't have a position for him when he started, but we created it because I didn't want to let him go. He's a good guy.
Wow. So, okay, let's continue on here, because there's so much I want to talk to you about. We're running up against the clock here.
Okay.
The one thing I want to talk about is you are a voracious reader. I mean, voracious reader. Every time we go into the mastermind meeting, you have read, I don't know, a gazillion books. So, and I kind of touched upon this. I asked you this at the actual event, at the mastermind meeting. But I want to get into a little bit deeper. Number one, how do you choose the books that you read?
Okay.
Right, so let's start with that.
Like a lot of people, people make recommendations. I'm very, very observant. I'm curious. I have a natural curiosity. I pay attention to things. If I'm reading the Wall Street Journal on a weekend on my lanai, and somebody talks about a book and it seems interesting, I might hit up my Amazon Prime, and 30 seconds later, the book's on its way. I do that. I rely on smart people like yourself and other folks who recommend books from time to time. I mean, I have inputs coming from all over the place. How do I prioritize them, and how do I finish them? I mean, that's actually that's the rub, because I mean, I still have this method, I guess, that I developed in college, which is I have 7 or 8 books going at any given time in various stages of completion. And if at some point, if I haven't picked it up and it's been, 3, 4, 5 weeks, I pretty much just throw it back in my library and forget about it, because it probably wasn't enough there to captivate me to keep me finishing it. So, and I don't always read. I read a lot of business books, obviously, a lot of nonfiction, but I also read some fiction. I've gotten better over the years. Some of that's been Dan prodding people to read a little more fiction, and so I've started doing that a little bit more. And then I also, as you know, I have a little bit longer commute than I used to, in that we moved our offices to downtown Orlando, and I moved my kids out of one school into a further school for other reasons we can talk about in a minute. But so now I have an elongated commute, and so while I'm doing, I'm basically doing the what do we call it, the windshield university. I've got audiobooks that I haven't, I got pious stashes and stashes of audiobooks that I get to, and my wife's convinced that this is other than caffeine, this is my one big addiction, is that I'm an audiophile, or whatever you call it, the people that collect books and buy books all the time. So I really use my Amazon Prime account, let me tell you.
Why do you like the traditional print book as opposed to the ebook or the Kindle book? Because I know that you really like the physical book. Why is that? Is there an advantage to it in your mind?
The advantage is, well, for starters, I have a home library. I have in my office, which you've been in, you probably saw, I got hundreds of books in there as well. I like seeing books. I feel like they're all little accomplishments if I got through them and finish them. I like to highlight. I like to dog ear the pages. Just a variety. And I like the tactile feel of a book. I mean, I'm old school, I guess. I don't know. I haven't gotten into the Kindle stuff. I mean, it's the same thing like when I edit copy. I mean, I could do it on the computer, backspace, whatever, and type it in or whatever. But, you talk to any of my marketing staff and they'll tell you they have to print stuff out, hand it to me, and I whip out the pen, and that's how I edit. I don't know. It's just a tactile thing, I guess.
Cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure, as always, talking to you. It was fantastic, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Dave. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Updating transfer options. Updating transfer options. Renewing parameters. Attention! Under provision of specific consumer goods detected.
Affirmative.
Shuttle arriving according to schedule. Warning: unfulfilled demand for specific consumer products.
Never guessed you'd be so conservative. Come on, make your voice count.
You rock! You totally rock!
Low project load. Transfer route inefficient. Cause: missing goods. Warning: energy shortage. Transfer route suffers from inadequate supply of goods. Competitive edge sharpened.
Your facilities are consuming more energy than you are providing. This reduces their productivity. Good. We should keep this procedure in mind in future.
Light, greasy. That's how dogs are. No reason not to come round.
Company trademarks grow in popularity. Warning: unfulfilled demand for specific consumer products. Space Shuttle docking.
matter what. I don't know how